Theme 12 Colonial Cities Urbanization, Planning and Architecture. Company agents settled in the Madras in 1639 for Fort St. George. Madras is the Fort St. George in 1639 and in Calcutta, Fort William in 1690. Bombay was given to the company in 1661 by the English king, who had got it as a part of his wife's dowry from the king of the Portugal. Remember that architecture helps in giving ideas a shape in stone, brick, wood, or plaster. From the bungalow of the government officer, the palatial house of the rich merchant, to the humble but to the humble heart of the laborer, buildings reflect social relations and identities in many ways. Next arrow. Poet Mirza Ghalib described what the people of Delhi did when the British forces occupied the city in the 18th Tunja. From Kashmiri Gate to Chandni Chowk, there was a battlefield. Three gates, Ajmeri, Turkoman, and Delhi, were still held by the rebels. A. What gives town their character? Question mark. The emperor lived in a fortified palace, and the town was enclosed by a wall, with entry and exit being regulated by different gates. Within these towns were gardened mosques, temples, tombs, colleges, bazaars, and caravanserais. The focus of the town was oriented towards the palace and the principal mosque. In towns of southern India, such as the Madurai and Kanchipuram, the principal focus was the temple. In northern India, the maintaining this order was the work of the imperial officer called the Kotwal, who oversaw the internal affairs and policing of the town. Next arrow. J.L. Nehru's grandfather, Gangadhar Nehru, was the Kotwal of the Delhi before the revolt of 1857. B. Changes in the 18th century AD. With the political and commercial realignments, old towns went into decline and new towns developed. The gradual erosion of the Mughal power led to the demise of the towns associated with their rule. The Mughal capitals Delhi and Agra lost their political authority. The growth of the new regional powers was reflected in the increasing importance of regional capitals, that is Lucknow, Hyderabad, Seringapatnam, Pune, Nagpur, Baroda, and Tanjore. Continuous warfare between the new kingdoms meant that mercenaries too found ready employment there. Some in Mughal rule in the northern India also used this opportunity to create new urban settlements such as the Kasbah and Ganj. However, the effects of the political decentralization were uneven. In places, revenue some places renewed economic activity. In other, war, plunder, and political uncertainty led to economic decline. Next arrow. Kasbah is a small town in the countryside, often the seat of a local notable. Next arrow. Ganj refers to the small fixed market. Next arrow. Both Kasbah and the Ganj dealt in cloth, fruit, vegetables, milk products. They provide for the they provide for noble families and the army. Next point. The European commercial companies had set up the base in the different places early during the Mughal era. The Portuguese in the Panji in 1510, Dutch in Masulipatam in 1605, British in Madras in 1639, and French in Pondicherry in 1673. Towns developed around these cities. By the end of the 18th century, the land-based empires in Asia were replaced by the powerful sea-based European empires. Forces of the internal trade, forces of the international trade, mercantilism, and capitalism now came to define the nature of the society. From the mid 18th century, there was a new phase of change. Commercial centers such as the Surat, Masulipatam, and Dhaka, which had grown in the 17th century AD, declined when the trade shifted to other places. As the British gradually acquired political control after the Battle of the Plassey in Taras Tunja, and the trade of the East India Company expanded, colonial port cities such as the Madras, Kolkata, Bombay rapidly emerged as the new economic capitals. New occupations developed and the people flocked to these colonial cities. By about 1800, they were the biggest cities in India in terms of population. Second point, finding out about colonial cities. 2A. Colonial records and urban history. From the early years, the colonial government was keen on mapping. This knowledge would allow better control over the region. When the towns began to grow, maps were prepared not only to plan the development of these towns but also to develop commerce and consolidate power. The town maps give information regarding the location of the hills, rivers, and vegetation. all important for planning structure for defense purposes. They also show the location of the ghats, density and quality of the houses, and alignment of the roads used to gauge commercial possibilities and plan strategies of taxation. From the late 19th century AD, the British tried to raise money for administering towns through the systematic annual collection of the municipal taxes. To avoid conflict, they handed over some responsibility to elected Indian representatives. Institutions like the municipal corporations, with some popular representation, were meant to administer essential services such as the water supply, sewage, road buildings, and public health. The activities of municipal corporations in towns generated a whole new set of the records maintained in the municipal record rooms. The growth of the cities was monitored through regular head count. The first All India census was attempted in 1872. Thereafter, from 1881, decennial census became a regular feature. This data is an invaluable source for studying the urbanization in India. Next arrow. What maps reveal and conceal? The Survey of India was established in 1878. While the maps that were prepared gave us a lot of information, they also reflect the bias of the British rulers. Large settlements of the poor in town went unmarked on maps because they seemed unimportant to rulers. As a result, it was assumed that these blank spaces on the maps were available for other development schemes. When these schemes were undertaken, the poor were evicted. Then comes the 2B trends of change. In the 40 years between 1900 and 1940, the urban population increased from about 10% of the total population to about 0%. The smaller towns had little opportunity to grow economically. Calcutta, Bombay, and Madras, on the other hand, grew rapidly and soon became sprawling cities. In other words, the growth of these cities as the new commercial and administrative centers was at expense of the other existing urban centers. As the hub of the colonial economy, they functioned as collection depots for the export of the Indian manufactures such as the cotton, textiles in the 18th and the 19th centuries. After industrial revolution in England, this trend was reversed and these cities instead became the entry point of the British manufactured goods and for the export of the Indian raw materials. The nature of this economic activity sharply differentiated these colonial cities from the India's traditional town and the urban settlement. The introduction of the railways in 1853 meant a change in the fortunes of the towns. Economic activity gradually shifted away from traditional towns, which were located along the old roads and rivers. Every railway station became a collection depot for raw materials and a distribution point for imported goods. For instance, Mirzapur on the Ganges, which specialized in collecting cotton and cotton goods from the Deccan, declined when the railway link was made to Bombay. With the expansion of the railway network, railway workshops and railway colonies were established. Railway towns like Jamalpur, Valtair, and Bareilly developed. Third point. What were the new towns like? 3A. Ports, forts, and centers for services. Madras, Kolkata, and Bombay became important centers of East India Company. English East India Company built, built its factories, that is, mercantile offices, there, and because of the competition among the European companies, fortified these settlements for protection. Indian merchants, artisans, and other workers who had economic dealings with European merchants lived outside these forts in settlements of their own. Thus, from the beginning, there were separate quarter for European and Indians, labeled as the White Town and the Black Town respectively. Once the British captured political power, these racial distinctions became sharper. After the 1850s, cotton mills were set up by the Indian merchants and entrepreneurs in Bombay, and European-owned jute mills were established on the outskirts of the Calcutta. This was the beginning of the modern industrial development in India. The economies of the Bombay, Calcutta, and Madras were not primarily based on the factory production. The majority of the working population in these cities belonged to tertiary sector. There were only two proper industrial cities, Kanpur and Jamshedpur. Kanpur was specializing in leather, woolen, and cotton textiles, and Jamshedpur was specializing in steel. India never became a modern industrialized country since discriminatory colonial policies limited the level of the industrial development. Calcutta, Bombay, and Madras grew into large cities, but this did not signify any dramatic economic growth for colonial India as a whole. Next arrow. Ionic was one of the three orders, organizational systems of ancient Greek architecture, the other two being Doric and Corinthian. One feature that distinguishes each other was the style of the capital at the head of the columns. These forms were re-adapted in the Renaissance and neoclassical forms of architecture. Doric capital, Ionic capital, Corinthian capital. 3b. A new urban milieu. Image. The old courthouse and the writers' building engraved by Thomas and William Daniel in Staros chassis. The courthouse on the right, with an open arcaded veranda and Ionic columns, was pulled down in Staros Banwe. Next to it is the writers' building, where the East India Company servants in India, known as the writers, stayed on arrival in the country. Next image, the new building at the Chaurangi, engraving by the Thomas and William Daniel in Staros. Most were in the Palladian style, with pillared verandas that were meant to keep off the summer heat. The nature of the colonial next point, the nature of the colonial city changed further. After 1857 report, British attitudes in India were shaped by a constant fear of rebellion. They felt that towns needed to be better defended and white people had to live in more secure and segregated enclaves away from the threat of the natives. Pasture lands and agriculture fields around the older towns were cleared, and new urban spaces called the civil lines were set up. White people began to live in the civil lines. Cantonments, places where the Indian troops under the European command were stationed, were also developed as safe enclaves. These areas were separate from but attached to the Indian towns. For the British, the black areas came to symbolize not only chaos and anarchy, but also filth and disease. They feared that disease would spread from the black to the white areas. From 1860s and 70s, stringent administrative measures regarding sanitation were implemented and building activity in the Indian towns were regulated. Underground piped water supply and sewerage and drainage systems were also put in place around this time. Sanitary vigilance thus became another way of regulating Indian towns. Then, C. The first hill station. Shimla was founded during the course of the Gurkha War 1815-16. Anglo-Maratha War of 1818 led to the Mount Abu. Darjeeling was wrested from the rulers of the Sikkim in 1835. Hill stations became strategic places for billeting troops, guarding frontiers, and launching campaigns against enemy rulers. British assured hot weather with epidemics. The overwhelming presence of the army made these stations a new kind of cantonment in the hills. These hill stations were also developed as sanitariums, that is, places where soldiers could be sent for rest and recovery from illness. In 1864, the Viceroy John Lawrence officially moved his council to Shimla, setting seal to the practice of shifting capitals during the hot season. Shimla also became the official residence of the Commander in Chief of the Indian Army. Then came the D point 3D. Social life in the new cities. Amar Katha, that is my story, by Binodini Das, 1863 से 1941. Amar Katha was a pioneering figure. Binodini Das was a pioneering figure in the Bengali theatre in the late 19th and the early 20th century AD, and worked closely with the dramatist and director Girish Chandra Ghosh. She was one of the prime movers behind the setting up of the Star Theatre in Calcutta. Between 1910 and 13, she serialized her autobiography Amar Katha, My Story. She exemplified the problem women faced in the recasting their roles in the society. Next arrow image. A late 19th century AD Kalighat painting. Male anxiety about female power was often expressed through the figure of the woman as a charmer who transformed men into sheep. As women began to be educated and moved out of the seclusion of their homes, such images of women began to proliferate in popular prints. Next arrow, a swang, popular amongst inhabitants of Jilipara, fisherman's quarter. Jilipara, fisherman's quarter. Fourth point, segregation, town planning and architecture. Madras, Kolkata and Bombay. 4A, settlement and segregation in Madras. Company had first set up its trading activities in the well-established port of the Surat on the west coast. Subsequently, the search for textiles brought British merchants to the east coast. In 1639, they constructed a trading port at Madraspattam, locally known as Chennapattam. The company had purchased the right of settlement from the local Telugu lords. the Nayakas of the Kalahasti. Color and religion determined who was allowed to stay here because they were European and Christian. The Black Town developed outside the fort. It was laid out in straight lines, a characteristic of the colonial towns. It was, however, demolished in the mid 1700s and the area was cleared for a security zone around the fort. A new black town developed further to the north. This housed weavers, artisans, middlemen, and the interpreters, who played a vital role in the company trade. Next arrow, Pet. Pet is a Tamil word meaning settlement. Pet नहीं पेट पेट हुआ शायद. Pet is a Tamil word meaning settlement, while Puram is used for a village. Puram is a Tamil word used for village. Next point. The new black town resembled traditional Indian towns, with living quarters built around its own temple and bazaar. On the narrow lanes that crisscrossed the township, there were distinct caste-specific neighborhoods. Washerman Pet was a colony of dyers and bleachers of cloth. Chinta Tripet Chinta Tripet was an area meant for weavers. Royapuram was a settlement for Christian boatmen who worked for the company. The Dubashis were Indians who could speak two languages, the local language and the English. They worked as agents and merchants acting as intermediaries between the Indian society and the British. They used their privileged position in government to acquire wealth. Their powerful position in society was established by their charitable works and patronage of temples in the Black Town. Madras developed by incorporating innumerable surrounding villages and by creating opportunities and spaces for a variety of communities. Initially, jobs with the company were monopolized by the villagers, a rural caste who took advantage of the new opportunities provided by the British rule. With the spread of the English language, Brahmins started competing from the similar positions in the administration. Telugu Komatis Telugu Komatis were a powerful commercial group that controlled the grain trade in the city. Gujarati bankers had also been present since the 18th century. Paraiyars and Vaniyars formed the laboring poor. Paraiyars and Vaniyars. Paraiyars and Vaniyars formed the laboring poor. The Nawab of Arcot settled in the nearby Triplicane, which became the nucleus of the substantial Muslim settlement. Mylapore and Triplicane were earlier Hindu religious centers that supported a large group of Brahmins. San Thome, with its cathedral, was a center for the Roman Catholics. As the British consolidated their power, resident Europeans began to move out of the fort. Garden houses first started coming up along the two main arteries, Mount Road and the Poonamali Road, leading from the fort to the cantonment, where the Indians too started to live like the English. As a result, many new suburbs were created from the existing villages around the core of the Madras. Then fourth, 4B, town planning in Calcutta. There were many reasons why the British took upon themselves the task of town planning for the early years of their rule in the Bengal. One immediate reason was the defense. In Star's Ponja Siraj-ud-Daulah attacked Calcutta and sacked the small fort of the British traders. The English East India Company traders had been continuously questioning the sovereignty of the Nawab. They were reluctant to pay custom duties and refused to comply with the terms. Subsequently, in 1757, after the Battle of Plassey, East India Company decided to build a new fort, one that could not be easily attacked. Calcutta had grown from three villages called the Sultanati, Kolkata, and Govindpur. The company cleared a site in the southernmost village of the Govindpur, and the traders and weavers living there were asked to move out. Around the new Fort William, they left a vast open space which came to be locally known as the Maidan or Carrier Mutt. Carrier Mutt. This was done so that there would be no obstructions to a straight line of fire from the fort against an advancing enemy army. Once British became more confident, they started moving out of the fort and building residences along the periphery of the Maidan. The vast open space around the fort still exists. Next arrow. The Line of Fire. The Line of Fire was replicated in many other towns. During the revolt of 1857, many towns became rebel strongholds. After their victory, the British proceeded to make these places safe for themselves. For instance, Red Fort. For instance, in Red Fort, they destroyed buildings close to the fort, creating a substantial empty space between the Indian neighborhoods and the fort. A direct line of fire was considered essential just in case the town rose up against the Firangi Raj once again. In 1798, next point, in 1798, Lord Wellesley became the Governor General. He built a massive palace, Government House, for himself in Calcutta, a building that was expected to convey the authority of the British. Wellesley was Wellesley was concerned about crowding, excessive vegetation, dirty tanks, smells, and poor drainage. British believed that the poisonous gases from the marshlands and the pools of the stagnant water were the cause of the most diseases. Tropical climate is itself seen as unhealthy and enervating. Creating open places in the city was one way of making the city healthier. Wellesley wrote a minute, an administrative order. Minute means an administrative order. So Wellesley wrote a minute in 1803 on the need for town planning and set up various committees for the purpose. Many bazaars, ghats, burial grounds, and tanneries were cleared or removed. From then on, the notion of the public health became an idea that was proclaimed in projects of the town's clearance and town planning. Next arrow. In his minute on Calcutta, 1816, Wellesley wrote, "It is the primary duty of the government to provide for the wealth, provided provide for the health, safety, and convenience of the inhabitants of this great town by establishing a comprehensive system for the improvement of the roads, streets, public drains, and water courses, and by fixing permanent rules for the construction and distribution of the houses and the public edifices, and for the regulation of nuisances of every description." Next point. After Wellesley, town planning was carried on by the Lottery Committee at Harastara with the help of the government. Lottery Committee Lottery Committee was so named because funds of the town improvement were raised through the public lotteries. In early decades of the 19th century AD, raising funds for the city was still thought to be the responsibility of the public-minded citizens and not exclusively that of the government. The Lottery Committee commissioned a new map of the city so as to get a comprehensive picture of Calcutta. Among the committee's major activities was road building in the Indian part of the city and clearing the river bank of the encroachments. In its drive to make the Indian areas of Calcutta cleaner, the committee removed many huts and displaced the laboring poor, who were now pushed to the outskirts of the Calcutta. Cholera started spreading from the Tara and in 1896 plague made its appearance. The causes of the disease had yet not been firmly established. The government proceeded on the basis of the accepted theory of the time that there was a direct correlation between living conditions and the spread of the disease. Such views were supported by prominent Indian merchants in the city, such as Dwarkanath Tagore and the Rustomji and Dwarkanath Tagore. Densely built up areas were seen as incendiary since they obstructed direct sunlight and circulation of air. That was why working people's huts or bastis became the target of demolition. Frequent fires also led to the stricter building regulations. Example: thatched huts were banned in Tharo Satis and tilled roofs made mandatory. Tilled roofs made mandatory. Next arrow. Basti in Bengali and Hindi originally meant neighborhood or settlement. However, the British narrowed the sense of the word to mean makeshift huts built by the poor. In the late makeshift huts built by the poor according to British, but originally it meant neighborhood or settlement. In the late 19th century AD, Bastis and incendiary slums became synonymous with became synonymous in British records. Next point. Now the government took over all the initiatives of the town planning, including funding. This opportunity was used to clear more huts and develop the British portions of the town at the expense of the other areas. The existing racial divide of the white town and the black town was reinforced by the new divide of healthy and unhealthy. Indian representatives in the municipality protested against this unfair bias towards the development of the European parts of the town. Public protests against these government policies strengthened the feeling of anti-colonialism and nationalism among Indians. Next arrow image. A part of the European town in Calcutta after the Lottery Committee improvements from a plan by the J.A. Scalks. Then 4C architecture in Bombay. Bombay was initially 7 islands. By the end of the 19th century AD, half the imports and exports of India passed through Bombay. Opium was exported to China by East India Company. Indian merchants and middlemen supplied and participated in this trade, and they helped integrate Bombay's economy directly to Malwa, Rajasthan, and Sindh, where opium was grown. This led to growth of an Indian capitalist class. Bombay's capitalists came from diverse communities such as the Parsi, Marwadi, Konkani Muslim, Gujarati Baniya, Bohra Jew, and Armenian. In 1861, American Civil War and cotton boom. In 1869, the Suez Canal was opened, and this further strengthened Bombay's links with the world economy. The Bombay government and the Indian merchants used this opportunity to clear Bombay Arabs Prima in Indies, a Latin phrase meaning the most important city of India. Arabs Prima in Indies. By late 19th century AD, merchants in the Bombay were investing their wealth in the new ventures such as cotton mills. They also patronized building activity in the city. Many new buildings were constructed at this time. These buildings reflected the culture and confidence of the rulers. The architectural style was usually European. This importation of the European styles reflected the imperial vision in several ways. First, it expressed the British desire to create a familiar landscape in an alien country and thus to feel at home in the colony. Second, the British felt that European styles would best symbolize their superiority, authority, and power. Third, they thought that buildings that looked European would mark out the difference and distance between the colonial masters and their Indian subjects. Indians got used to European architecture and made it their own. The British in turn adapted some Indian styles. One example is the bungalow, which was used by the government officers in the Bombay and all over India. The name bungalow was derived from Bangla, a traditional thatched Bengali hut. The colonial bungalow was set on extensive grounds, which ensured privacy and marked a distance from the Indian world around. The traditional pitched roof and surrounding veranda kept the bungalow cool in the summer months. The compound had separate quarters for a retinue of domestic servants. The bungalows in the civil lines thus became a racially exclusive enclave in which the ruling classes could live self-sufficiently lives without daily social contact with Indians. For public buildings, three broad architectural styles were used. Two of these were direct imports from the fashion prevalent in England. The first was called the neoclassical or the new classical. Its characteristics included construction of the geometrical structures fronted with lofty pillars. It was derived from a style that was originally typical of buildings in the ancient Rome and was subsequently revived, readapted, and made popular during the European Renaissance. It was considered particularly appropriate for the British Empire in India. The British imagined that the style that embodied the grandeur of the imperial Rome could now be made to express the glory of the imperial India. The Mediterranean origins of their architecture. The Mediterranean origins of this architecture was also thought to be suitable for tropical weather. The town hall in Bombay was built in this style in 1833. Another group of commercial buildings built during the cotton barn of the 1860s was the Alpenstone Circle, subsequently named Horniman Circle after an English editor who courageously supported Indian nationalists. This building was inspired from models in Italy. It made innovative use of covered arcades at ground level to shield the shopper and pedestrian from the fierce sun and rain of Bombay. Another style was neo-Gothic, characterized by the high-pitched roofs, pointed arcs, and detailed decoration. So the first was the neoclassical, and another style was the neo-Gothic, characterized by the high-pitched roofs, pointed pointed arch, and detailed decoration. The Gothic style had its roots in buildings, especially churches, built in the northern Europe during the medieval period. The Neo Gothic or the New Gothic style was revived in the mid 19th century in England. This was the time when the government in the Bombay was building its infrastructure and this style was adapted for Bombay. An impressive group of buildings facing the seafront, including the Secretariat University of Bombay and the High Court, were built in this style. Indians gave money for some of these buildings. The University Hall was made with money donated by the Sir Kowasji Jahangir, by Sir Jahangir Ready Money, a rich Parsi merchant. Sir Kowasji Jahangir Ready Money, a rich Parsi merchant. The University Library, Clocktown. The University Library Clocktown was similarly found in the banker Premchand Roychand and was named after his mother as Rajabai Tower. Indian merchants were happy to adopt the neo Gothic style since they believed that the building styles were progressive and would help make Bombay into a modern city. Example, Victoria Terminus, the station and headquarters of the Great Indian Peninsular Railway Company, designed by the F.W. Stevens. Victoria Terminus was designed by F.W. Stevens. As a group, these buildings dominated the central Bombay skyline, and their uniform neo-Gothic style gave a distinctive character to the city. Towards the beginning of the 20th century, a new hybrid architectural style developed which combined the Indian with the European. This was called the Indo-Saracenic. So, three architecture styles: neoclassical or the new classical, second, the neo-Gothic, and third, the Indo-Saracenic. Indo was shortened for the Hindu, and Saracen was a term Europeans used to designate Muslim. The inspiration for this style was medieval buildings in India with their domes, chhatris, jalis, and arches. By integrating Indian and European styles in public architecture, the British wanted to prove that they were legitimate rulers of India. Example: the Gateway of India, built in the traditional Gujarati style to welcome King George V and Queen Mary to the India in 1911. The industrialist Jamsetji Tata built the Taj Mahal Hotel in a similar style. Besides being a symbol of Indian enterprise, this building became a challenge to the racially exclusive clubs, hotels maintained by the British. In the Indian localities of the Bombay, traditional styles of decoration and building predominated. The lack of space in the city and crowding led to a type of building unique to Bombay, the chawl, the multi-storied single-room apartments with long open corridors built around a courtyard. Such buildings, which housed many families sharing common spaces, growth of neighborhood helped in the growth of neighborhood identity and solidarity. Next arrow image. While Bombay remained the main center of Gothic revival, Indo-Saracenic flourished in Madras. The design of the Madras law court combined Pathan elements with Gothic ones. Next image, the Municipal Corporation building of the Bombay, designed by F.W. Stevens in 1888. The fusion of the Oriental and Gothic designs. Fifth point, what buildings and architecture styles tell us? Architecture reflects the aesthetic ideals prevalent at the time and variations within those ideals. Buildings also express the vision of those who had built them. Rulers everywhere seek to express their power through buildings. So, by looking at the architecture of a particular time, we can understand how power was conceived and how it was expressed through structures and their attributes: bricks and stones, pillars and arches, soaring domes and vaulted roofs. Many Indians regard European architecture as symbols of modernity and civilization, but not all Indians thought alike. Many rejected European ideals and tried to retain indigenous styles. Others accepted certain elements from the West that they saw as modern and combined these with the elements drawn from the local traditions. By looking at architecture, therefore, we can also understand the variety of forms in which cultural conflicts unfolded and political conflicts between the imperial and the national and the regional or the local were played out. So the timeline in the end. 1500 से 1700 European trading companies established bases in India. The Portuguese in Panji in 1510, the Dutch in the Masulipatam in 1605, the British in the Madras in 1639, in Bombay in 1661 and in Calcutta in 1690, the French in Pondicherry in 1673. Star Tunja Battle of Plassey, British become rulers of Bengal. Star 73, Supreme Court set up by the East India Company in Calcutta. 1803, Lord Wellesley's Minute on Calcutta Town Improvement. 1818, British takeover of the Deccan. Bombay becomes the capital of the new province. 1853, railway from Bombay to Thane. 1857, first spinning and weaving mill in the Bombay. 1857, universities in the Bombay, Madras and Calcutta. 1870, beginning of elected representatives in municipalities. 1881, Madras Harbour completed. 1896, first screening of the film at the Watson's Hotel, Bombay. 1896, plague starts spreading to major cities. 1911, transfer of capital from the Calcutta to the Delhi.